Hey, this is Doug Jones from Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, Hellboy 1 and 2, Hocus Pocus, Pan's Labyrinth, and currently on Falling Skies. But today, you are listening to GenreTainment.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of GenreTainment at sci-fi-pulse-radio.com. We're your hosts, Marks
and Julie. GenreTainment is where we talk about what's happening in the world of film, TV, and web series. We give you interviews with writers, directors, producers, and actors in both independent and not-so-independent creations. It's episode 108, and we go a little dark and scary with prolific horror author Jeffrey Thomas.
Thomas is a finalist for both the Bram Stoker Award and the John W. Campbell Award. We discuss how he became an author, what draws him to horror, sci-fi, and Lovecraftian fiction, the origins of his Punktown setting, also the Kickstarter for a Punktown comic book anthology, and the Punktown role-playing game, tips for writing, and much more.
Now, before we get started with the interview, we should point out that the music you just heard at the beginning of the show was a snippet from the theme song for our web series, Reality on Demand. It was a song composed and performed by our friend T. Sean Hardy, and you can find our web series at realityondemandseries.com. Now let's get started with our interview with writer Jeffrey Thomas. Well, hi, Jeff. Welcome to GenreTainment.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Now, you are a prolific writer of science fiction and horror with many, many short stories and novels, and you were a 2003 finalist for the Bram Stoker Award for the Best First Novel for, was it Monstrosity?
Yes, correct.
And a 2008 finalist for the John W. Campbell Award for Deadstock.
Mm-hmm.
And your popular setting, Punktown, spans a number of works. So how many novels and short stories do you have published?
Oh, my God. I don't know. Seriously, when people ask me sometimes about my books, I have to go look on Wikipedia to remind myself.
That's a good problem to
That's
have.
I just have a bad memory. I've had a lot of books, and the reason why it's hard for me to remember exact numbers is because there's been foreign language editions. And also, there's been different states for each book, like a hardcover, a deluxe hardcover, trade paperback. And sometimes these come out, like a digital version might come out years after the published version. So it makes me lose track of how many there have been books. But there's been a lot.
Well,
a lot is a very technical, accurate number. We like that.
Yes, that's as scientific as I can get with it.
Where did your writing journey begin?
Well, aside from, writing stories when I was a kid that kind of just ended up in the closet, I mean, the published stories started happening in the late 80s with small press publications. And at that time, they were like photocopy, dot matrix kind of publications, and very crude. But it was very exciting to get a story placed in any one of those. Eventually, I started getting some attention, and I placed a story in Gore Zone magazine in like 1990, which was a big deal for me. That was the sister magazine of Fangoria.
Oh, okay.
So it was pretty similar, except that they would have one fiction story every issue. So that was a kind of a breakthrough for me. And in the late 90s, after getting published in more and more sophisticated small press magazines, I was approached by a few publishers kind of in rapid succession about doing short story collections in book form. And that was exciting. And that's what set it off. And the first one that came out was called Terra Incognita. And that was from Delirium Books. And right on the heels of that was Punktown from the Ministry of Whimsy Press, which was owned by Jeff Vandermeer, who's become, an extremely well-known writer of late. And from there, it's been one after another. Those were the breakthroughs for me, particularly Punktown, which that was kind of a career maker, such as my career is. It's been an exciting journey, and I've most of my books have been published by independent presses, but I've had a few mass market books released as well.
Now, most of your books or most of your stories are horror, sci-fi, or sci-fi horror type of genre stories. So what is it about that genre that really drew you to it?
I'm not sure. I just know that as a child that I was very enthusiastic about horror and science fiction. And I would literally ask myself sometimes, what do I prefer? Do I prefer science fiction? Do I prefer trying to pick a favorite? It was like a confusion. It was like chocolate or peanut butter. And I finally realized that, you could combine these things, and they've been combined all along by Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. That's a science fiction horror story.
Yeah.
And Lovecraft stories are science fiction horror. It's a long tradition. It doesn't have to be either or, but it began as a child with loving those movies, and those old TV shows like Outer Limits was a profound influence on me. And
Love Outer Limits. Marcus and I both.
my God, if my short stories could approximate the feel of the Outer Limits, that would be a goal that I would want to achieve.
So you just need to destroy Punktown, because that's happened like in every other element.
Outer Limits. How many
Earth
times they blow
blows
up Earth?
Oh yeah, I worshipped that show as a kid, and again, Outer Limits was a science fiction program, but it presented those science fiction ideas in a very eerie way.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it had to do with the black and white, I think.
Yeah, and then, later episodes were in color, and they still managed to do that. But I think a lot of them were probably more. The ones I remember were more heavily sci-fi, I guess.
I never really followed the remake.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever
they get caught up. They're good.
I should check it.
In fact, Marcus and I were just lamenting about how you just don't have those kinds of lineups anymore. Because at one point, when we were in college, on Saturday nights, like late night shows, it would be, they'd show like an episode of X-Files, an episode of Outer Limits, an episode of Poltergeist: The Legacy.
Oh.
And it would just be like one cool show right after the other. And there was a show no one else but me saw, apparently, called Nightmare Cafe that I loved. It was just pretty wild.
Sure, if I've heard of that one myself.
Yeah, it was. I watched Forever Night.
England. Robert England, wasn't it?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Check it out. See if you can find it. We need to see if we can find it.
It's out there somewhere, I'm sure, still.
The truth is out there.
Yes. Yeah. And now also a lot of your stories are often kind of lumped into the Lovecraftian subgenre.
Subgenre. Say that 5 times fast.
When you first kind of fell into that, were you already a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, or you just kind of fall into that and discover H.P. Lovecraft?
Were you a fan of happy endings in general? Uplifting stories of the conquering human spirit?
I like a balance between the uplifting and the utterly depressing. I came into Lovecraft through Stephen King. I read his short story Jerusalem's Lot that I guess he wrote when he was very young, and I loved it. I thought, boy, this is unlike anything I've read by King. This is like my favorite short story by him. It really resonated with me. And then when I realized it was an homage to Lovecraft, I thought, well, I better check Lovecraft out himself. I was aware of his name, but I'd never read him. And this was like in the mid 80s, I guess. And so I went to the library and got out a book and read a couple of his stories, and I was just hooked. In the late 80s, I read every story he had written and just fell in love with his work. And so it was around that time that I started experimenting with stories that incorporated some of his ideas. And I've been writing them on and off since.
What is it from that you like to use to put into it? I mean, besides the tentacles.
It's not Lovecraft unless there's tentacles.
His stories are what made him unique. I think was that his stories are science fiction. They're not. His stories don't involve the supernatural. His gods are really these just beings that are just beyond us in evolution or what have you, and they're such an alien makeup that they're godlike to us. It was just his hinting at these vistas beyond our little limited, mundane, ant-like view of reality and of the cosmos. And so they have this cosmic scale. His stories are called cosmic horror. The idea of other dimensions and so forth, just this scope really appealed to me, and it just seemed like a very rich, fertile kind of a area to work in, that kind of approach. Mm-hmm. So I've written stories that reference his works, but I've also written stories that try to capture a similar feeling without actually mentioning any of his creatures, his books, so I guess that's what distinguishes Cthulhu mythos stories from Lovecraftian stories that kind of call to mind Lovecraft. I try not to. I've written quite a few, and I have them collected, most of them collected in one volume called Unholy Dimensions. But I've written a lot of stories for anthologies. I get invited to them. I actually try sometimes to get away from it because I don't want to be. I want my cake and eat it too. I want to be considered a very good Lovecraftian writer, but I don't want to be pigeonholed. I don't want to be only a Lovecraftian writer.
Well, I mean, what's the point of having a cake if you don't get to eat it?
Yeah, I think it's legit.
Yeah.
So, but I sometimes I think, well, it's time to move on. I don't want to become a crutch. I want to be able to continue to flex my own imagination. I don't want to rely too much on somebody else's inventions. But by the same token, the challenge of writing new Cthulhu mythos stories is taking those old ideas and putting a new and individual kind of spin on them. So there's that also. So the way I ultimately look at it is I want, if I still continue to do the occasional story for an cool anthology that I'm invited to, I will do so. But I'll do the other thing too. I'll do or follow my own path as well and try to juggle both balls and what others I can throw in the mix.
It's easier to juggle one. You just toss it up and down. Two starts.
Just throw one up and down. Yeah.
So let's talk about your experience with awards. Tell us a little bit about what each of these awards are, the Bram Stoker Awards and the John W. Campbell Awards are, and your experiences getting nominated.
It was exciting and rewarding being nominated. The Bram Stoker Award is any awards, particularly. There's been a lot of there's been a lot of controversy this year, about the Hugo Awards and so forth. Mm-hmm. But it's exciting to be nominated for an award, especially when you're not pestering people to vote for you or anything. Both awards were a surprise to me. Both nominations were a surprise to me, and very gratifying. Like I said, I didn't pursue votes or anything, and I didn't win those awards. But it was just a great honor being a finalist for them both. The Campbell Award, I think, is especially prestigious. But it was very rewarding.
Yeah, there were no rabid or sad puppies involved in those ones.
And apparently he didn't go stumping, trying, in different trying to get.
I didn't email a single soul saying, "Hey, you think you could kind of vote for me?" I've had people do that to me before, and it's kind of.
Do you email Iowa first in that case, or does it really matter?
I just think, it's kind of a little distasteful to wave a flag too much and say, "Hey, I've got this story, nominated," but I don't know. Maybe maybe I should change my outlook on that.
It's it would be a little odd, I would think, to be like, "Hey, go vote for me."
It's for your consideration, and maybe it's okay. Maybe I just I should change my attitude about it. I don't know.
Yeah, but still an honor to get nominated for it.
Heck yeah.
It surely is. Yes.
Especially when you weren't actively trying to.
Yeah, it was like I said, it was a surprise. It was very nice surprise.
Well, let's talk about the works that were nominated. You had Monstrosity. Can you describe that to our audience?
That is it takes place in my world of Punktown, which is a far future city, infamous for its level of crime. It's on another world, colonized by Earth people, but it's a melting pot for all these races from all these other planets and dimensions. And in some of the stories, I've incorporated Lovecraftian elements. And not all. I wouldn't want anybody to come into Punktown thinking that all the stories are going to have that Lovecraft element. Actually, it's probably the minority of them. However, Monstrosity is one that does. It's a novel. It very much involves the Cthulhu mythos, and I don't drop a lot of names in there, but that's the feel of that novel. Mm-hmm. It was my first published novel, and that's why it was nominated for the Bram Stoker for the best first novel.
Oh, or what's the elevator pitch for it? What's the concept for that book?
Really, the concept is that Punktown, this man comes to believe, the protagonist comes to believe that Punktown is almost a sentient, malevolent intelligence entity in itself, kind of a zeitgeist. He encounters evil cultists and understands that some kind of the typical kind of a manifestation of some evil monstrosities is gonna take place, and he doesn't know if he's going mad, and he doesn't know if his girlfriend is involved, and so he becomes kind of an unwitting investigator into these occurrences. And my fellow writer Joseph Pulver was kind of like the inspiring force behind this book. He had started up a press called Hive Press, and he asked if I'd write him a novel for that. I had started Monstrosity. He encouraged me to go with it. And although Hive Press didn't work out, he wasn't able to sustain it. He gave me the inspiration to finish that novel, so I dedicated it to him. He's a very good friend. And it was published by Prime Books. 2000. That was 2000 and oh god, 2002, I guess, 2003. I forget. I got to look at Wikipedia again. Apparently.
Yeah,
I think it's 2003.
That's when it was nominated.
Yeah.
You're right. Thanks.
You're welcome. Have you met Jeffrey?
Hi, Jeffrey.
Are we really talking to the real Jeffrey?
I'm Kaiser Soze.
So what about the other project, Deadstock? What's that about?
Deadstock is another Punktown novel. And again, even though I say that not all the Punktown stories have a Lovecraftian element, Deadstock is another one that does. It's not as up in your face as it is in Monstrosity, but it's definitely there. That one, how that came to be was I had been approached by imprint of Games Workshop Black. What was the name of it? These people contacted me and they said, we heard about your nomination for Monstrosity, and we have the rights to the New Line Cinema franchises, and we want to write a series of new novels inspired by different New Line Cinema franchises. Would you be interested in doing this? And at first I thought, no, I do my own thing, And then I thought, like 2 seconds later, like, are you kidding me? Of course I would, my pride went right out the window. And so I threw a couple pitches at them. One was for Jason X, which was Friday the 13th in outer space. And I gave them a pitch for a novel for that, and they liked it. But they had already lined up a bunch of those, and they wanted to see how that was going to work. So in the meantime, so ultimately they I guess they were glutted with those, and they never used my pitch. But I threw another pitch at them for an original Nightmare on Elm Street novel, and they accepted it and they published it. And that was my first mass market book, and I was thrilled with that. It was so fun to work with a pop icon like Freddy Krueger.
Oh yeah. So
that publisher, oh my God, what was the name? It was an imprint of Game Workshop. So they were just starting up a new imprint called Solaris Books, and they said, "Do you think you could write us a Punktown story for this imprint?" And I was like, "Oh, are you kidding me?" So that became Deadstock, and it was a great feeling because I'd never worked like this before, but they wanted me to write a chapter by chapter outline before they could greenlight it.
Wow.
Characters break down and so forth, and I thought, wow, I don't work like this. I don't work with such a structure. And I had to do this with Nightmare on Elm Street also, that book, which is called The Dream Deal. And I didn't know if I could even do it. I even thought, like, maybe I'm going to have to tell them I can't. I work more organically. I write it. At the best I write notes, but I don't write an outline. But when I sat down and did it, writing the outline was like writing a story, just a very bare bones story. And then it was kind of fun actually to go back later. And after they gave me the green light on it, and they said, okay, do it. And then to write the novel based on my outline was it was fun and a great feeling knowing that as you're writing this book, it's already sold. It's going to be on the bookshelves. It was just exhilarating. And then the same thing happened with the follow-up, Blue War. But it was really cool because Deadstock and Blue War got a lot of great reviews. And, later on, Solaris changed hands. And I haven't gotten into the new Solaris, but maybe down the line.
What's the synopsis for Deadstock? What's that about?
The protagonist of Deadstock in the follow-up book, Blue War, which is not a sequel, but it has the same protagonist. The protagonist is named Jeremy Stake, and he's a private eye. And he's a mutant. And his particular condition is that he can Punktown, I'll say right now, it's a science fiction setting. But I don't write hard science. It's fantastical. It's horror. There are ghosts in Punktown.
You're doing that loosey-goosey sci-fi like Doctor Who.
Loosey-goosey, timey, wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey.
Yeah.
It's fantastical sci-fi. Anything goes, Mm-hmm. And so Jeremy Stake is a mutant who can change his face to look like anybody's face. All he has to do is look at you long enough. And it happens to him even when he doesn't want it to. So he tries not to look at people's faces. But if he wants to, he can change he can alter his face to look like somebody else. Even, a woman, an alien, if they aren't too, he has limits. He can't, it has to be, but he can get close. as long as it's physiologically possible, within a certain parameters. So he's the detective, and private detective, and he's made this ability work for him. And I use it in that device in all different kinds of ways in the Jeremy Stake stories. And he gets involved in this situation where it seems like a really innocent kind of a situation where the daughter of a rich businessman who's into biotech, she has her doll stolen, and the doll is like little organic bioengineered entity, and they want to find out who stole the doll, and so he's got to go look for this girl's doll. But the doll turns out to be, because of the technology that was used, it turns out to be a creature that's going to grow and grow, take on more sentience and power, and be this really, like, again, Lovecraftian godlike entity. So he learns that it's not just about getting this doll back, but saving Punktown from a real profound threat.
That sounds good.
No pressure or anything.
No, but I think you're going to need to pay me a little bit more.
Yeah, no kidding.
So Punktown's come up a few times now. So can you talk a little bit more about that setting, and also, where did the idea of creating such a setting came from? And when you first created it, did you know you're going to keep returning to it?
Yeah, just for the basics, for people who are listeners who haven't maybe read it yet.
Yeah, I developed it in 1980 was the first time it came to me. And it's a weird little story, but I was driving somewhere. I was riding somewhere with my father. And I looked at a woman in a neighboring car, and the way her long hair was falling down in her face and the way her eyes were shadowed, it looked like her long hair was growing out of her eye sockets. And for some
I've
reason,
had hair days like that, to be honest.
a bad eyelash day.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know what it was that just kind of set something up in my mind that she would be like kind of an alien race where they have long swimming kind of tendrils instead of eyes, and that became the Tiki Hodo race from Punktown. They've appeared in a lot of Punktown stories, but from there, for some reason, that just jump started my imagination. And by the time I got home that day, I already had the idea that I was going to write about this city. It was going to be this melting pot of all these alien races, and I was going to follow all these different stories and avenues. I wasn't going to stick to one linear plot. And it was going to be kind of a social commentary, kind of a vehicle for satire, not so much a projection of the future, but a kind of a distorted view of the here and now and the eternal human condition. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote a number of novels over the years. I didn't have a computer then or even typewriter. I wrote them by hand. Eventually, though, when I started publishing in the small press in the 80s, as I said, I started writing Punktown short stories and submitting them, and slowly they started getting published. And like I said, Jeff Vandermeer approached me and said, "Why don't we put some of these Punktown stories together in a chapbook?" And then he changed his, kind of upped it a little bit and decided the chapbook would be a book. And so it's been Punktown ever since. It's and again, it's like the Lovecraft stuff. I don't want to get pigeonholed. I don't want to only write Punktown, but it is a place that's wide open. Anything can happen there. And so it's a very comfortable place to come back to. I very seldom use the same characters in my Punktown stories. The big exception is Jeremy Stake. I've written 2 novels with him and a couple of short stories and 1 novella. Mm-hmm. But the vast majority of the Punktown work involves characters who come and go, because that was my vision for Punktown. It's kind of like you've got this kind of bird's eye view of Punktown. You kind of swoop down, look into this window for a while, follow that person, then pull up and swoop down and follow this other person for a while. And that's the approach I like to have. And I like to follow the common people. There aren't any real messianic kind of superhero save the day, Luke Skywalker's, the Neo, the cosmic Messiah.
The savior.
Yeah, there's not that kind of, and I'm not knocking that stuff. That's great, but it's not what I'm trying to do. My people might be working in a coffee shop, or they might be working in a bookstore, and I follow their story, and that's just the kind of way I like to go with it.
That's cool. I like that concept in a way. I mean, you see it more in shared world settings, but like wild cards, I always like that because you have different characters cycling in and out, different storylines.
Yeah, it's fun.
So how many, you might not be able to answer this very easily, but like how many novels and short stories do take place in Punktown of yours? Like what, if you don't know the exact number, what percentage or so?
I'm looking on Wikipedia. Let's see.
Because Because I bought a few of your books, Punktown, Monstrosity, and a couple
Yeah,
others. But I didn't know exactly which ones are which. So
I'll go down the list. It's not all that long. Punktown was the first one. It was a collection. It came out in 2000. Monstrosity was a novel. Came out in 2003. Everybody Scream was a novel. Came out in 2004. Punktown Third Eye was an anthology, a shared world anthology, where some of my friends and people I admired wrote their own Punktown short stories.
oh, cool.
And Punktown Shades of Grey was a collection that I wrote with my brother Scott Thomas, who's also a writer. He wrote half of the stories in that one.
Were there 50 or more or less shades of gray?
Oh, God. I know. I sued that book for money.
50 Shades of Grey in Punktown.
Oh, my God. God forbid. The next one was Deadstock, a novel, 2007. Blue War, a novel, 2008. Health Agent, a novel, 2008. Actually, that was written in the 80s. It was in handwritten form. I had to have it transcribed. Voices from Punktown was a collection, 2008. Monstrosity came out as an ebook in 2011. Red Cells, a novella in 2014. And my most recent was a collection, Ghosts of Punktown, from Dark Regions Press in 2014. Next year, Centipede Press, which is a very prestigious press, they do these big, beautiful, gigantic books. They're going to do like a Punktown omnibus, which is going to collect most of my Punktown short stories in one gigantic volume. And I'm going to write a couple of new stories for that too.
That's great. I love omnibuses.
Say that word again. It's like omnibuses.
Goodbye.
Omnibuy.
And I'm really happy too. There's beginning in October, around mid-October, there's going to be a Kickstarter for a Punktown graphic novel book called Visions from Punktown. I was approached by a guy named Christopher Taylor, who's done scripts for publications like Creepy and Eerie, and he wanted to script some of my Punktown short stories into graphic novel format. And he's got together this crew of artists you can't believe, fantastic artists. And so this Kickstarter is going to kick off in a couple of weeks. And I just can't wait to see what, the finished stories, because the stuff they've shown me so far, the artwork is amazing. And they're really capturing the spirit of Punktown, all the crazy phantasmagorical imagery, all the aliens and so forth. They're doing a great job of bringing that to life. So I'm just so excited that that's going to happen.
No, it sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I also heard, or I know that there was a Punktown role-playing game in the works. What's the progress on that?
That was a successful Kickstarter a couple of years ago, and the text is all done for that, and much of the artwork is done. The cover is done; it's beautiful, and there's still some interior illustration work being done, but it's getting closer to being released. And it's going to be released by a company called Chronicle City.
Awesome.
That's a good name. If it's going to be Punktown, it's Chronicle City. It was meant to be.
Yeah.
All the role-playing games are going to be in city settings. That's what it is. So.
Yeah.
And I don't play role-playing games myself, but people told me Punktown would be a great setting for that. So,
okay.
I think
so.
There'll be like a punk town and a prep town and a college town.
Town.
Well, what'd you call it?
Funky Town.
Town.
I like Funky Town.
Is that like the cyberpunk, like the punk?
No, actually, cyberpunk. When I started hearing people say cyberpunk, I was like, oh, come on. I took the name Punktown in 1980. I guess from what I researched later, cyberpunk started being used in 1982. It's funny. You would think that it was the punk rock era that inspired me to call it Punktown, but it was the song Funky Town.
Woohoo! Won't you take me to
Can you believe it? I was working in a shoe factory at the time, and I'd hear the radio in the background over all the machines and everything, and I would hear that song Funky Town, and I thought they were saying, "Won't you take me to Punktown?" And I thought, and it stuck in my head. And then later I found out it was Funky Town, but it was too late. Punktown was stuck in my head. So that's.
Well, now we were getting this ready for some reason because I've heard it more recently. Uptown Funk kept getting in my head. The song. Now it's going to be Funky Town.
Yeah, Funky Town. That's appropriate.
So there's a Punktown TV show. The theme song's going to be Funky Town, right?
Won't you take me to
awesome.
Funky Town?
And Lips Incorporated, I think, is the name of the group that sang that song. And I checked their website out once, and on their comment board or whatever, I told them the origins of Punktown and how they inspired that, and they sent me a Funky Town T-shirt.
Oh, cool!
Yeah.
Do you wear it or do you have it like hanging up on your
It's
wall?
too small for my girth.
Well, you should just like frame it and have it up on the wall.
I should.
That's awesome. We have a lot of people listening who are filmmakers
We
or
have a lot of
writers.
people listening. Woohoo! Sorry.
And a lot of them are writers and filmmakers and such. So we always like to get tips on the show from the guests. You already touched on this a little bit. So I usually like to ask writers, what method of writing do they like to do best, like plotting or pantsing, or writing by seat of your pants. Sounds like you're a little bit more of a pantser.
It sounds dirty, but it really just means by the seat of your pants.
I getcha.
Sounds like pantsing, but you did do some plotting and you kind of liked it. So
Yeah.
so where do you stand now?
I still do it pantsing. I still do it organically. Like I said, for the most I would do is write pages of notes, and I don't even do that anymore lately. What I do now is I go back a lot and reread what I've already written. And so I'm editing as I'm writing and thinking. I kind of go more slowly now. Part of that is less free time than I used to have, but part of it's also my method's a little bit slower, a little more. I'm stepping a little more carefully. And that just seems to be an organic evolution in my process. Aside from those 3 books where it was kind of imposed on me to outline, but I did enjoy it. It's just not my natural tendency to do it that way.
How do you approach writing a short story versus a novel?
Write more words for
Well,
Yeah.
that too.
Okay, I want to make sure you knew.
I don't know how to to say it any differently, really. You just got to be more concise. You got to block the scenes out a little bit more. I find I have to kind of just try to use the minimum of scenes, like panels in a graphic story where I can't have a lot of connective tissue here. I've got to show this scene, and you have to just, in a novel you have more elbow room. It's nice, but short stories are very, very rewarding to write because of that, because you have to really make it count. When it comes to horror stories, I really do think the horror story in general is better served by the short story form.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more satisfying in the short story form for the most part. And so these days I tend to write short stories more than novels. I have a lot of, I have maybe 3 or 4 novels that kind of stuck at the halfway point. I've just been focusing so much on short stories. I get anthology invitations and so forth. And I haven't, so for a few years now, I haven't worked on these novels because I'm just so focused on the short stories.
It's probably why like horror movies you tend to have a lot more horror movies than you have horror TV shows.
It's hard to sustain the suspense and the mystery, I think.
That's true. I never really thought about that, but that does make sense. That the best horror stories on TV have been like Twilight Zone and Thriller and Alfred Hitchcock Presents and so forth, like where you're just getting one short story told in cinematic form, as opposed to a science fiction show that can sustain a plot line from, if only in a loose way, from episode to episode, with the same characters and so forth.
Yeah, you can fight off an alien invasion for seasons,
Yeah. Or even like Star Trek, the original one where they didn't really bring back the various aliens like they did in the other shows with the Ferengi and the Cardassians and so forth, and they bring them back again. In the classic Star Trek, they would be kind of like just a whole new world every time, except for the Klingons occasionally or something like that. But you had this cast, this 5-year mission, whatever, that tied the series together. But yeah, in horror, you don't really see a whole lot of, aside the rare one, I guess. I never watched Buffy, but the Kolchak.
Oh, you totally should.
Yeah, I heard it's good.
Yeah, the first season's probably.
It's not what I would call horror, though.
No. The first season's a little more low budget and everything, but it's still really good, and it just keeps getting better and better. Although I wasn't a huge fan of the last season, but yeah, it was good, especially if you want horror. The episode Hush, it's awesome.
Hush is a very good episode. Yes.
Is that one of those spooky looking?
The gentleman, yeah, and there's actually no dialogue for most of the episode.
No kidding.
It's wild.
Those are creepy looking images from that.
Oh yeah. It's creepy, and the fact that there's no speech, they're communicating without actual lines through a lot of it, and so it just keeps up this tension, and Really, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is such a good show.
I think that got nominated for either Golden Globe or Emmy.
Something like that, yeah. Because they were like, and that was a hard sell. He was like, okay, I'm going to have an episode of a TV show where people don't talk.
That is very intriguing.
Because the gentlemen take away everybody's ability to speak, so that way no one can hear you scream when they come after you. So
man.
And so, like, they can have the complete run of the entire town because no one can call for help.
Yeah.
Oh, that is spooky. And did that predate the Slender Man stuff? Because that imagery is very Slender Man-ish.
Yeah, it did predate that, yeah.
Yeah, it predates it. Mm-hmm. And, the series had ongoing was very good, but there were always, those episodes that just stand out. There was a musical episode.
Yeah. Wow. That's why it's not horror, really.
Yeah, there's a musical episode. Well, I mean, it had like supernatural.
But yeah, if you're gonna watch the episode, watch Hush. That's a good one to try out.
But doesn't he have to familiarize himself really with the characters?
You just need to know that she's Buffy.
Okay, look up the stuff on Wikipedia. Familiarize yourself with the characters. Then watch Hush. It's on Netflix. Like, watch Hush, and then you'll want to watch the rest of the series.
Okay, that does sound like something I'd want to see. That Hush sounds very.
Now I want to go watch it. It's getting close enough. That's one of those things. Like when it's around Halloween, we always watch.
Cool.
Yeah. So now I'm just thinking about Buffy a lot.
Sorry.
So the only one that's really kind of halfway did it is American Horror Story, but that's only one season at a time.
Yeah, it's a season.
So.
Oh, I haven't even seen that.
I Scream. It just had a season.
Well, we'll see how long.
Yeah, we'll see how long it goes. And I loved the first Scream movie. It came out, was it 96? And good year. And I loved.
I've never seen that. I've never seen any of those Scream movies.
Oh, really? See, the first one is so good. And then they've done Scream now. It's for a new generation.
Oh, is it?
It's a series on
MTV.
MTV, right?
Yeah, it's on MTV.
And the first season's out, and I was like, oh, they're gonna recreate a movie. You know how it's like you don't want to reboot of something you really liked.
Yeah,
it was good. We've had a ball watching that.
Yeah, we discovered MTV actually has a couple of okay shows because
it turns out it's not music television anymore.
Because Scream is not too bad, and then so that made us curious about Teen Wolf. So we were
watching it.
Love
Teen Wolf.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't have a TV anymore, so I'm so out of touch. I don't.
That's why you get so much done.
That's why. Yeah. Right.
I do have Netflix on the Xbox, so I watch movies, but I'm so out of touch with TV. Once in a while, I catch up on Walking Dead. I'll have like a Walking Dead marathon, where I just watch episode after episode. But I'm so out of touch with TV.
Yeah, Marks likes Walking Dead.
I bet you'll like, who knows? But if it's done well, the Mist TV show could be really good.
Yeah, that does sound like it has possibilities, that could go anywhere, really. And hopefully they'll do a good job with it.
All right, so anyway, we're getting off topic.
We could just hang out and talk with you about all kinds of stuff, just, for fun.
Oh, absolutely.
So about your approach to writing and such, do you have any tips on writing you'd like to share with anyone that you've learned over the years?
The one tip that I always like to suggest to people is that they should read widely. They shouldn't read only in one genre. You have so much you can learn from reading outside. If you want to be a horror writer, don't just read horror. I really think you should try to read as widely as possible. Read classic literature. There's so much I've taken away from writers who were not horror writers, like Thomas Hardy and Yukio Mishima. Although they wrote a few horror stories, surprisingly. Well, Mishima, I can think of one. It's called Thermos Bottles. And Thomas Hardy wrote a couple of stories.
Sounds terrifying.
It's very subtly terrifying, and that was the cool thing about that story.
Oh, those are my favorites.
So subtle. It's just this Thomas Hardy, is one of my favorite writers and poets. And he wrote a couple of stories that were like, one was called The Withered Arm, and the other was called Barbara of the House of Grebe, which is kind of more of a gothic story than
it sounds like it.
It's grotesque and disturbing, very disturbing, and sometimes you can learn more valuable things from those writers than the people who are associated with horror. And it kind of helps you to, that's the kind of inspiration that helps you to find your own voice. And so you're not consciously or unconsciously aping the people who have been successful in your chosen genre before.
Helps you break away from potential cliche.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes it's easy to do. I don't know if to anyone else, but it is to me. If I've been reading one particular genre, particularly one particular writer for a while, I don't intend to, but it's like I almost start mimicking like the style. And I don't know if that's just kind of how, when you're talking to people with a certain accent, eventually it's like you start kind of mimicking it without really meaning to.
Precisely. That's a phenomenon. Somebody, it's as simple as when somebody says, "How you doing?" and you come back, "How you doing?"
How you doing?
Somebody, and you kind of unintentionally sometimes take on people's mannerisms. I even was one time talking to a friend on the phone who stutters, and I found myself stuttering, and I'm like, he's gonna think I'm mocking him, but it was like a weird unconscious thing. I think it's an empathy device.
It is. It's like neurolinguistic mirroring in that, and they even recommend, if you're trying to connect with somebody, that you mirror their body language and to help them feel at ease. So there's something to it, but most of the time we don't do it consciously.
Unconsciously. But you are right that sometimes you do find yourself unconsciously drawing inspiration from the particular person you're reading right now. So that's probably why it's a good idea to read really good stuff.
If you're going to rip someone off, rip off someone good.
Yeah, rip off somebody good. I was recently within this past year, I read Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, which became one of my favorite novels right away. And I was writing a story at the same time as that, and I wasn't in any way consciously trying to write like that, but it was very inspiring, and I found myself kind of lifting myself up maybe beyond the kind of comfortable writing I had been doing that I do other times. It kind of challenged me to try to write a little bit more beautifully, and as long as you're not, to me, it's a difference between being influenced and inspired. Try not to be influenced, but it's okay to be inspired.
Ooh, good advice.
Yeah, that's a quote right there.
Yeah.
We talked about a few different authors and works that have influenced you a little bit. Is there any other works that have influenced you over time that you think that you really like and influenced your worldview?
There's probably so many and sometimes there were some writers who I'll read repeatedly, and then there are other writers that maybe I haven't read a lot of their work, but a certain book by them will still be a favorite. But somebody I've come back to again and again is Martin Cruz Smith, who wrote Gorky Park and all those great series about Arkady Renko, the Russian detective. I will admit that was not just an inspiration, but an influence on my character Jeremy Stake. No particulars, but just the idea of the brave detective who who's kind of going against the odds, and he has a moral fiber, and I love the way Martin Cruz Smith writes. He really is masterful at balancing popular writing with literature. He has a beautiful style, and I just recently, about a year ago, read Graham Greene's The Quiet American, which became right away another favorite novel of mine. And in Graham Greene, I think I saw, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Martin Cruz Smith were inspired by Graham Greene. It was something about, again, balancing. Martin Cruz Smith is great at portraying Russia, and in Graham Greene's novel, he's discussing Indochina, Vietnam, and something about the way the dialogue went and the way that the protagonist Fowler in The Quiet American was interacting with people. It reminded me a little bit of Arkady Renko's interactions with people. It's just a hunch of mine that Martin Cruz Smith is a fan of Graham Greene.
Any upcoming projects and works you would like to let people know about?
I've been invited to a number of anthologies, so I'm trying to get some stories written for those. I've had to turn down a couple of anthologies recently. It just sometimes I overload my plate. Like I said, I've got to write some more, another original Punktown story or two for that Centipede Press omnibus that's coming out next year.
That's the word of the day.
Yeah, omnibus. That's a good name. I suggested they call it that because they were originally going to call it the collected. No, it was something it sounded just too definitive to me. I said, well, you could come out with that and call it the collected Punktown stories, and tomorrow I'd write a new Punktown story, and suddenly,
It's just
true.
a collective.
yeah, it's gonna be the complete Punktown stories. And I
Yeah.
said there could never be
You're like, guys, I'm still alive. There's going to be some more.
there'll be tomorrow. It will never be the complete Punktown stories. So that's why I suggested a Punktown omnibus. And so that's the working title. I don't know if that's going to be what it will be called. Also next year, I'm supposed to have a collection come out called Haunted Worlds from Dark Renaissance books. Sometimes, publishing schedules, things get delayed, but it is tentatively scheduled for 2016. And that's a short story collection. And it would be all stories that have not previously appeared in print. I have a short story in the latest issue of Black Static magazine, which can be found on newsstands. I have a novella in that magazine, and it's set in a kind of a fictitious Southeast Asian country that I've written other stories about. So I'm hoping one day to collect all those into one book. That'll be the first published story in that setting.
What's the country called?
It doesn't have a name, actually. It's called. They're called Tales from Somewhere. And so it's kind of, and I explain in one of the stories that they didn't want their country to have a name because there'd been so many attempts by other countries to conquer them that they decided to not use the name for the country anymore, hoping that their country would kind of fly under the radar of other countries and other countries would leave them alone.
That's an interesting tactic.
So it's kind of an odd conceit. It's a strange collection of stories. They're not quite horror. They're not science fiction. Some of them have supernatural elements, some don't. I guess the best way to describe them would be to call them weird fiction. But again, they all take place in this Southeast Asian country. That's very much inspired by my travels to Vietnam. I've been to Vietnam 9 times. My daughter's half Vietnamese. I love the culture. I love the people. So it's that country's very much been an influence on that series of stories. And so, like I said, the latest Black Static has the first one that I've sold, and it's called Distinguished Mole.
I was thinking a beauty mark. Oh,
It is about a beauty mark. Yeah,
you're writing about a beauty mark.
Yeah, a beauty mark gone awry.
Well, very cool. I look forward to seeing those projects and also the graphic novel Kickstarter and all that good stuff. So,
yeah.
So before we go, where can our listeners find you and your work online?
The best place to find me is on Facebook. I have a real Facebook presence, and it's more fun to me to go there than my blog has been sadly neglected. But I do have an Amazon.com page. Jeffrey Thomas. There's a whole slew of books there. That's the best place to find my work.
And so everyone knows it's Jeffrey spelled Jef, not the Geo. So they can find you. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's Ffrey. I can't believe some parents actually name their kids Jeffrey with an Ery. That's an abomination. Oh, that's an abomination to me. That's so wrong.
There should be a horror story about that.
Yes. Oh my God, I hate that.
In school, like we had in marching band at one point, there were a few Jeffreys, like kind of all in the same section.
Yeah.
And so one guy spelled it Ge, so we just called him Geoff or Geoff.
Yeah.
So that we'd be like Jeffrey, and Geoff.
There are 5 Jeffrey Thomases at the company I work at, so I'm always getting other people's emails.
Oh my gosh,
Jeez.
That is not convenient at all.
It's not. But on 2 of my book covers, my name is spelled Ery, and luckily they showed me the mock-up first, and I'm like, if it comes out like that, don't even send me a copy of it. I don't even want it. I gotta fix that. So
You people spell my name well, as you can imagine. Mark's gets some interesting stuff.
I'm sure. Yeah. I remember I called him Max once, or Mark maybe. He corrected me. I'm sorry.
He doesn't usually correct people. Usually I do it. But he's like, I don't care. I'll answer anything.
Mr. Pyle.
Names.
Psha.
Pyle being the name of the Quiet American, by the way.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Yes, thank you. It's been
Thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Hi, I'm Tim Wagner, author of The Way of All Flesh and Dark Art, and you're listening to GenreTainment.
Well, thanks to Jeff for taking the time to chat with us. Check out the show notes for links to his books and the Kickstarter.
Now we keep the Dark Rider theme on our next episode as we chat with dark fantasy author Alan Baxter. So So be sure to watch for that upcoming episode.
Now, also before we go, we want to remind you that you can always keep track of us by subscribing to us on iTunes or Stitcher, or by following our GenreTainment Facebook page, Marks' Twitter account, which is @MrMarks, our website at GenreTainment.com, or follow all of the shows at sci-fi-pulse-radio.com. And you can also find us with other excellent shows on Blog Talk Radio via the League of Geeks network at blogtalkradio.com/League of Geeks.
So that's it for today's GenreTainment. We'll be back soon with all new guests from our favorite films, TV shows, novels, and web series.
GenreTainment is a production of Alien Jungle Bug Productions. Until next time. Bad monkey.